Thanks very much, Chairman. Cahirlock. That's a tough one to follow, Deputy Penrose. But you're right at every level. You're right logically, you're right in your mind, you're right in your heart, and you've analysed the situation as it is. Bankruptcy. That's what it is. The banks ruptured this country. Deputy Murphy, Catherine Murphy, referred to the lending institutions. They're not lending institutions. They get a licence to take deposits. And only when they know how to lend properly can they use those deposits to generate activity and commerciality in the economy. Only then. What our banks did is measurably guilty at a level of 80% for the asset price bubble on a credit pyramid that went out of control in 7 years from 2001 to 2008. And you know what? The 5 million banking inquiry hasn't even touched on it. That's how pathetic that inquiry was. Boards of directors of the domestic banks in this country went way out of control. They lent all the deposits, the savings of businesses and households, and they ramped up more on a cocaine-fueled credit pyramid to more than doubling the size of the domestic banking economy in 5 years. That is woefully guilty, woefully guilty. And it left the people who are the victims of the crash that we're now trying to bandage with sticky plaster, 1 year bankruptcy and hesitancy in clearing the mess up in a manly sort of way, thinking that, having a suspicion that most of them are trying to hide things and maybe not being honest. That's a laugh. When I read the sanctions for non-cooperation or concealment by the bankrupt, sure, the banks concealed everything. They so concealed their balance sheets that the last government gave a blanket liabilities guarantee, which now has a residual of 25 billion, easily identifiable, in the governor of the central bank's desk in his office. 25 billion, the so-called genius trick of our finance minister to extend a pro note of 10 to 12 years into a long-dated promissory bond. He had no business to do that. And on the 18th of February next, hopefully, Joan Collins will be vindicated in the Supreme Court when the ministers for finance put the Irish people on the line without even legislation being passed in this Parliament, at a level of 31 billion at the time. There's 25 billion still outstanding. Let's think about that 25 billion. We should cancel that because there's no validity in it whatsoever. Zero. And if anybody thinks there is a validity, let them show it, because there isn't. It is the losses of 2 private banks, Irish Nationwide Building Society and Anglo-Irish Bank, IBRC. And, you know, we hear people talk about bankruptcy and shame. There's no shame. It's a fact. If people don't have the assets to discharge their liabilities, it's just a fact. It's like if their body collapses. If their heart isn't working, they're just physically ill. That's okay. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what the cause of a disease is or lack of health. The fact is they're not well. And you bring all the assistance to make them well again. You don't make them a little bit well or give them Lucozade when they need surgery. Page 2 of the Minister's speech. I think deputies will agree that this bill represents an important milestone. The bill comes at the right time. What a load of nonsense. That is pathetic. Utterly pathetic. If the medicine or the surgery doesn't arrive at the time it's needed, it's a waste of time. A waste of time. Let's think about it. A waste of time. You guys had 5 years almost to actually, with huge numbers, massive numbers, to do some things. You didn't even listen to some of the good ideas on this side of the House, or even from your own backbenchers. Because I had that experience. I was once in the Fine Gael party. You didn't want to know some good ideas. The monopoly of wisdom, that's where it is. But if you really were compassionate for the Irish people, you'd take on board the ideas that are evidence-based and that would make progress and cure ills and fix situations. But you don't. And that's why, even if you take away the fig leaf of the fastest growing economy in Europe, look at the reality. Housing waiting lists, the longest ever. Hospital elective surgeries and procedures, 400,000. God almighty. More than the population of Cork. Schools and universities threadbare now. The universities slipping down the ladders. Yes, they are. Homelessness. They're the realities. Mortgage debt. 38,000, 2 years in arrears and more. And the banks. The bill says the reason is that a relatively small number of bankruptcy cases feature particularly serious and flagrant levels of such conduct, concealment by the bankrupt, for which there's currently no adequate deterrent. Shit, the banks fooled the last government and this government and continue to fool them. Do you think there's been any serious restructurings, meaningful ones, done by the banks? Very few. I know. I've been involved in the cases. It's a farce. They're out of operational control. They don't know what's happening. One division, the legal divisions of banks, are sending correspondence. So are the arrears sections. The people who are trying to maybe have a look at restructuring don't know where they are. That's the reality. I know. I'm dealing with it. And Bank of Ireland, mysteriously, back in the day when they were lining up assets for transfer into NAMA, reduced the prospective bill of lading of transfer of 16 billion into NAMA to 12 billion. How in the name of God, back in 2009, could you have a reduction in toxic loan portfolios to be transferred into NAMA? Anybody with even half a brain and half a day's experience in loan ledger management would know that's impossible. But they did it. And do you know why? Because 4 billion at the then prospective discount rate of 30% is 1.2 billion. And that was the reduction of the requirement for recapitalisation, which kept Bank of Ireland out of state majority control. So they fooled us. They actually fooled us. And then they fooled us again when the consortium of 5 investors came in. For 1.1 billion, they bought 35% of the second big bank in this country. That was stupid. I told the Taoiseach at the time before, do not proceed, pause. Because Wilbur Ross, he was a genius in his own interests, made a $500 million profit on his little proportion of that consortium. It was a one-way bet. He couldn't have lost. Couldn't have. That's the geniuses we had to allow this to happen. Guys, all I'm saying is, try and put the priorities of the people of Ireland first. And not the establishment, not the establishment, not the vested interests, but do the homework, because you haven't done the homework. If you did the homework, you'd know what to do. You failed, for instance, to send some notices of assessment to the multinational corporates on their increasing profits from 2008. Sure, that was pushing an open door, but you didn't do it. You were afraid of your own shadows. Pathetic. You were prepared to allow banks beat up small families and small businesses, while you sort of shivered that the MNCs might go away. Sure, they're paying it now. You're scratching your heads and saying, where did we get the extra corporation tax from? Because they know the game is up. They'll have to pay it.
Your time's
in the
up.
future.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, Willie, I commend you for bringing this. It's a
Deputy
great
Mathews.
achievement, but it's just, what a waste of time.
Thank you, Deputy Mathews.
What will you do for the Irish people?
Thank you.
Cancel those 25 billion.
Deputy Mathews,
You can reinstate the pension
Excuse me.
fund by the 17 billion that was plundered.
Deputy Mathews.
by the banks.
Deputy
You
Mathews.
could use 4 billion of the remaining 8 to refurbish and repair the water supply system, which this crazy elephant says.
Deputy Mathews, could you have a bit of respect for the chair? Your time is over. You're taking into other people's time. The next speaker. There's no more time. The next speaker. Excuse me. The next speaker.